Hello, timeless gamers. Hope you're all well and enjoying this Star Wars special. We'll talk about my main pick of Star Wars game, and that's going to be Knights of the Old Republic, also known as KOTOR. It's a game that Sir Joe's experienced, but is only at the very start of that, so I thought it best to give you a broader perspective on the game. It was released in 2003 on PC. It's essentially a CRPG, but it's one of the first or early 3D CRPGs. There were other 3D CRPGs before it, like Neverwinter Nights and such like, but it's still in that infancy 3D CRPG phase. It's essentially a separate, an entirely separate entity of a story compared to the Skywalker story. It takes place 4,000 years before all the Skywalker stuff does with Luke and Han and all that. So it's very detached from all that. But despite that, pretty much the universe is entirely the same. So that is a little bit quirky. The technology is pretty much all the same. With that said, one thing that KOTOR does, which I find is actually pretty amazing and a real strong point of the game, is that it takes Star Wars' lore and universe and all the fashion essentially that comes with that, and it puts its own spin on that. But that spin still feels very much in that universe to me. I think that's fantastic, because I look at the Phantom Menace and the prequels that George Lucas did, and some of that stuff don't sit that well with me. With when you put it into context of the original trilogy, some of that prequel stuff feels more futuristic than when we get New Hope and the later stuff. Later in the timeline, not our timeline. Gets confusing, don't it? But this in KOTOR, like I look at some of the enemy design, some spaceships design, and I think it's fantastic. I think it's a really nearly perfect evolution of what we got in the original Star Wars. Taking that, respecting it, and changing it into something else that feels very much part of it. I like that. I think it's really, really good. But apart from that, the game itself's brilliant. Okay, it is fantastic. Now, I think Sir Joe might not. He don't like his CRPGs. He don't like things where you've got to kind of like actually work at getting somewhere, and you do have to work a bit, not loads, but it's a CRPG. So your character build's very important. Your squad's very important. You can't just just experiment and hit and open stuff. You have to think things through and plan things out before you really get into it. It's a pretty easy game anyway, but it can if you don't plan these things out, you can find yourself just basically not hitting people with your weapons and struggling a little bit to get through it. But it's just a fantastic game. It really is. I think what makes it, the two things that make it for me are the powers and the moves and that you get to experiment with. When you're in early game, you don't get that much. Typical CRPG, low level Dungeons and Dragons style role playing. You don't really, you don't have much to do. Once you get to that like mid-level, probably a third of the way into the game, it opens up a lot more. And not only do you get more powers and that, obviously you can explore more worlds. There's more open world elements, so you can actually go exploring. So it's got a lot of actual gameplay fun to it, and it does all that, nailing that Star Wars aesthetic, sounds of the lightsabers, blasters, all that stuff, fantastic. but then what actually really makes the game is its story. A lot of CRPGs are more about the exploration and the character builds and all that type of stuff, and they have good stories as well. There's some great stories in CRPGs, but they tend to take a bit of a backseat to it's more about you and your team and the adventure rather than it is a story. Whereas this has got a superb story with one of the most, if not the most, biggest shock moments in any RPG I've ever played. I think it's I think it is pretty genius, really. As a kid, I certainly didn't see it coming, and its reveal was pretty mind blowing. And it does that a couple of times, but not. There's one or two times when it's lesser, but there is that one particular moment that if you have played this game, you will know that if you play this game without knowing the plot and story or anything about it, it knocks your head off basically. So I highly recommend Knights of the Old Republic. I think it's brilliant. I think like all these CRPGs, you've got to be a little bit patient to get with it. I do think the combat's not it's more gimmicky. It's nowhere near as tactical as some old CRPGs are. It's not. You don't have to think your strategies out to the nth degree for it. It's pretty straightforward. Once you've got some powers kicking ass, it's pretty straightforward. But generally speaking, it's brilliant, and it's spawned a sequel. It's a bit of a divisive sequel. A lot of people love it because its sequel is a lot more deep. It's an Obsidian game, and it's a hell of a lot deeper when it comes to its writing, its characters, and its hidden philosophies. Well, hidden philosophies. It's backroom philosophies. Sorry, but it is also a much slower and somewhat bloated game. I definitely prefer the original. I think the original is just more. It feels more like a Star Wars game, and it's better paced. Basically, it's not as clever as the sequel. The sequel's a lot more of a real a real RPG when it comes to the thought behind everything that's gone into it. But it's a bit boring. So it's worth playing, but I definitely say play these in order and check out the first one. So yeah, that's my choice. I will throw in an honourable mention to the Master System Star Wars game. The main reason for this really is that it's the same or very very similar game to the Nintendo Entertainment System Star Wars game, but it's better. It just plays better. There's quite a lot of skank in the Nintendo version. There's a lot of cheap deaths and a lot of just you can tell they've not polished. Well, they've either not polished the gameplay up or they wanted it to be cheap on purpose. Who knows? But the Master System loses all those negatives. Well, not all the negatives, most of the negatives, and is a lot more fun to play. It's a lot better. So they're my choices. May the 4th be with you, and keep your gaming time loss.